for, for actualizing Islamic renewal and guaranteeing an authentic Islamic modernity. Scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi present the notion, the framework of Fiqh al-Wāqi as something that allows Muslim scholars to issue fatwas appropriate for modern age and to bring to fruition the project of renewal by responding adequately to modern challenges. Fiqh al-Wāqi per se, it occupies a privileged place in the field of contemporary Islamic jurisprudence and renewal, alongside with other notions like maqasid, maslaha, ijtihad, and tajdeed, and is represent that kind of notion time to time come to the fore as encompassing solutions to contemporary problems, and then as a kind of panacea for resolving what is perceived as a problem in Islamic contemporary thought. In this talk today, I will first of all focus on the ways proponents of Fiqh al-Wāqi has theorized al-Wāqi, because what they said is that Islamic fiqh is missing contextual considerations, reality considerations, and that is the main problem. Therefore, we should come up with a framework of Fiqh al-Wāqi, jurisprudence of reality or reality-based jurisprudence. Then normally these scholars, the proponent of Fiqh al-Wāqi, has brought al-Wāqi as a main element of tajdeed. Then the question is, how have they theorized reality, al-Wāqi? In what way have they drawn from the classical Islamic tradition of philosophy and epistemology of the topic, if there is any continuity or disruption, what nature of theorization they have brought to the fore? So that will be the first part. And then the second part will be what kind of genealogy they have constructed of Fiqh al-Wāqi. So where have they found Fiqh al-Wāqi in the Islamic tradition, in the pre-modern Islamic tradition? And then the third part will be what kind of definition they have brought about Fiqh al-Wāqi as a compound term, not al-Wāqi per se, but Fiqh al-Wāqi as a notion, and what can this tell us about this framework? And lastly, I will close it with the kind of renewal or reform that conceptualization of Fiqh al-Wāqi display. So generally speaking, Fiqh al-Wāqi is a movement of reform and renewal of Islamic law and Islamic thought in general. So what kind of renewal have been the scholar envisaging? So what kind of renewal have been they theorizing? So this will be the fourth part of my lecture today. So I will start with the first one, and I will share the PowerPoint, inshallah. It will be very few points there just for your attention to be caught and not lost. I think the PowerPoint is displayed, right?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, so the topic will be Fiqh al-Wāqi, theorizing reality in contemporary Islamic thought. And then, as I said, scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi have said that one of the main problems of Islamic thought and Islamic law in general is that Muslim scholars somehow have lost connection with reality, has lost connection with the integration of reality in their fatwas, in their discourse, etc. So my question is here, what kind of theorization of al-Wāqi has the scholar brought? Because this is their card, the main important card that they are bringing forward, that we have to pay attention to al-Wāqi, to the contextual reality or to reality. And we have to construct a fiqh that is reality-based. If you see the many scholars that are involved in this project, and these scholars come from different groups, and as I explained in my PhD, they come from the kind of more revivalist Muslim Brotherhood group like Qardawi and his colleagues. They come also from the Saudi Sahwi Salafi movement in Saudi Arabia, Nasir Umar, Salman al-Auda, etc. And some of them also come from the kind of more traditionally Sufi-oriented approach, like Abdullah bin Bayy, especially lately. So if you see the way they have talked about reality, you see that for many advocates of Fiqh al-Wāqi, the novelty of this concept lies in its systematic theorization and emphasis on the central role of al-Wāqi in Islamic legal thought and Islamic thought in general. These scholars stress the importance of incorporating a deep understanding of reality into Islamic jurisprudence to foster a dynamic interaction between scriptural texts and contemporary context. Their goal is to develop a modern jurisprudence or a modern Islamic thought that remains relevant and responsive to the challenges of the present era. Some proponents of Fiqh al-Wāqi, such as Abdullah bin Bayy, draw upon classical Islamic theological and epistemological tradition to frame their conceptualization of reality. Bin Baya, for example, invokes Imam Ghazali's articulation of the 4 levels in which an object or an entity exists. And Imam Ghazali speaks about the level of individual level, in the mind, in speech, or in writing. So ayniyan, dhihniyan, lafdhiyan, or khatiyan. And for Ghazali, the first level, so al-ayni, represent the reality of the thing as it is in itself, of the external object as the ayn itself, al-waqi al-khariji. In contrast, the second level, dhihni, exists in a cognitional formal way, in a surah, and consists in the establishment in the mind of an example, of a mithal, of the reality of the external object. And this process is what constitutes knowledge. The third level, for Ghazali, consists of the formation of a representation of the object, of the external object, through segmented sounds that indicate what is in the mind. And the fourth level comprises the formation of segmented letters, which serves as an indication for the speech. For Ghazali, starting from the last, from the writing, each level is an indication, a dalala, for the former, al-madlul, and corresponds to it, so corresponds to the external reality. As Ghazali says, our saying indicates what is in the mind, and what is in the mind is a representation of what exists, of that which exists, which corresponds to it. So based on this, understanding of Ghazali, of this part of Ghazali's discourse about the external reality and the human possibility of grasping and perceiving the external reality as it is, Bin Baya defines al-waqi' as the external real existence which may or may not correspond with the other 3 kinds of existence: the mental, the verbal, and the script, as Ghazali explained. This, Bin Baya continues, is because these representations, like the mental, the verbal, and the script, sometimes constitute a false existence based on deceptive mental form that does not align with the reality, with haqiqah. And following this definition, in which reality for Bin Baya is the external real existence, so the reality of the thing, or of as it is in itself, following this definition, Bin Baya in his books distinguished this Islamic realism, if we can call it like this, from the Cartesian notion of reality, from skepticism, and from Kantian idealism. However, his engagement with these philosophical frameworks, Western philosophical frameworks, remains cursory and largely based on secondary sources. So it's very succinct and largely based on secondary sources. The same is valid for Islamic theological tradition that he invokes, like Imam Ghazali in this case. Apart from mentioning in a general way some Islamic frameworks of understanding reality, in Bin Baya's writing there is no proper engagement with the metaphysical or epistemological Islamic tradition with regards to haqiqah, or reality. Bin Baya does not delve in depth in the Islamic classical discussions on the topic and does not claim to bring anything new on the table. So it's pretty much a repetition of some of the scholars that he follows, like Imam Ghazali. However, he uses the authority of classical Islamic epistemological and theological tradition on reality to provide his articulation of Fiqh al-Wāqi with an aura of authority and legitimacy. So the point of Bin Baya and scholars like him that use some of the classical Islamic tradition, theological traditions especially, with regard to reality, is that they are not concerned of analyzing to the details or bringing something new to the table. They draw upon tradition as much as it is sufficient for them to justify the articulation of Fiqh al-Wāqi. So it's a more of an instrumental approach to the tradition by selecting some scholars and providing a kind of language, a dictionary of semantics, let's say like this, of how al-Wāqi can be understood. But as I said, there is not a central, there is no a kind of deep analysis present in their text. In contrast to Bin Baya and other scholars who choose to draw from some of the Islamic theological and epistemological tradition on the reality, most scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi avoid this kalami or usul fiqh methodological approach to defining al-Wāqi, and instead they adopt definitions that are easily comprehensible for lay people and conducive to Islamic da'wah or Islamic activism. For example, Abdul Majid al-Najjar, a famous scholar in the trend of Islamic revivalism, defines al-Wāqi as what takes place in the life of people in their various fields, including patterns of living, habits, tradition, norms, as well as new events and occurrences arising in human life. Similarly, Nuruddin al-Khadimi described reality as the sum of individual and collective occurrences, private or public. And Ahmad Boud in a famous book, early book on Fiqh al-Wāqi, offers another definition and describes al-Wāqi, reality, as all that constitutes people's lives. Whatever constitutes people's lives is al-Wāqi, in all fields and all manifestations, phenomena, symptoms, and contingencies. As you can see, these definitions and many others that I have not included reflect a practical and a pastoral orientation, a da'wi orientation, catering to the needs of Islamic activists, preachers, and thinkers in their engagement with the complexities of human and social life. They avoid ontological or metaphysical concerns or epistemological concerns, and they treat reality as something that is intuitively perceived and accessible through everyday human experience. So their concern is to provide a very simple, commonsensical, immediate definition of reality as whatever happens in the life of people, the sum of all the events and occurrences that is useful for Islamic preachers, da'wis, scholars involved in activism, etc. And this is a kind of second trend. They do not draw for the Islamic classical tradition of philosophy and theology because they conceive that as too theoretical, not practical, and not useful at the end for the practical and pastoral orientation. And the third way, or the third, let's say, the third way of understanding reality is that some scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi have chosen to conceptualize al-Wāqi, al-Haqiqa, reality, within the framework of juridical ijtihad. For example, again, Abdul Majid al-Najjar defines al-Wāqi in this context as the human acts on which legal rulings are intended to be applied and directed. And Muhammad al-Makhala defines it as the events or actions that occur within time and space. These juridical definitions narrow the scope of al-Wāqi to human actions. So they are interested only or mostly on human actions, and particularly to those human actions directly relevant to the application of Sharia rulings, because not all actions are relevant to Sharia rulings. In this way, they try to simplify, let's say like this, the debate about reality, the external reality, how you can have access to it, and in what way there is a correspondence between our mental picture or imagery of reality and the reality itself. They try to avoid all of this by focusing on what reality is for Sharia. And what is for Sharia is all the human acts on which legal rulings are intended to be applied and directed, and that is what is important for them. And on the basis of that, they construct their own articulation of Fiqh al-Wāqi. So despite these varying approaches, the discourse of proponent of Fiqh al-Wāqi with regard to reality, we can say that it's not generally concerned with a theological elaboration regarding the ontological nature of external reality, or with a hermeneutical analysis of the ability of human cognitive faculties to correctly grasp and understand the essence or quiddity of the external existence. Reflecting the anti-speculative tendencies prevalent in contemporary Islamic thought, proponents of Fiqh al-Wāqi seems unconcerned to the philosophical or theological distillation of the notion of reality. In their writings, the analysis of what reality is and how knowledge of external existence is constituted is very succinct and, we can say, to a certain degree, superficial. The writing of Fiqh al-Wāqi scholars show an absence of detailed and elaborated theories of truth. And reality and the topic of haqiqah is not problematized, is resolved very easily, or let's say is presented as very simple and very easy, and then they proceed with the fiqh and with their shariatic elements that they want to add to Fiqh al-Wāqi. Their approach represents a form of direct realism. If the classical tradition, despite all the schools, can be considered to a certain degree a kind of indirect realism or kind of critical realism, the scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi, the theorization of reality in the scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi represents a form of direct realism, where reality is equated with what is immediately perceived and experienced in people's everyday lives. In the writings of the proponents of Fiqh al-Wāqi, reality is portrayed as solid, objective, self-evident, enough to be easily and correctly grasped by human faculties without contestation. The knowledge about it is presented as possible to be derived directly and in an unmediated way from the empirical world. Reality is what every human being faces in everyday life, and despite its dynamicity, it is sufficiently stable to be grasped by human intellectual faculties and open for moral and religion evaluation. At this moment, somebody might argue, or an argument can be made, that scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi they come mostly from fiqh perspective, of Shariatic scholars of Sharia, and their main concern is Islamic law. Therefore, it's not necessary for them to actually provide a theory of truth or to problematize reality, the notion of reality, and to respond to many schools from different Western or Eastern. The concern of a faqih is the hukm and the way to apply the hukm, and the reality for a faqih is different from a theologian or from a philosopher, or Muslim epistemologist, etc. And there is truth to that argument, for sure, but the problem is that scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi present themselves as bringing the attention to the Islamic contemporary discourse to al-Wāqi. And they present themselves as scholars who are aware of al-Wāqi, who know its centrality, and who can articulate it and show its importance and its centrality, especially in the modern world with the ruptures of modernity, etc., and then use this theoretical discourse or this analysis to build an Islamic Shariatic discourse that is relevant to the modern world. So in this context, in comparison with other scholars or their colleague, the reality, the emphasis on al-Wāqi and the emphasis on its centrality is a kind of distinctive card of this kind of scholars. And that kind of, let's say, distinctiveness is not reflected, let's say like this, in their actual writings about al-Wāqi. And the way in which they engage with the tradition is very simple and not, very deep, if I can say like this. And then the tradition is selected to certain aspect of it to provide the vocabulary for the scholar to display their way of reality. But mostly, the way they talk about al-Wāqi is the way usually normal people, or usually in the kind of everyday life, we talk about reality, and that is considered sufficient for them to start building on it the notion of Fiqh al-Wāqi per se. And normally this kind of scholars, proponents of Fiqh al-Wāqi, they have argued that Fiqh al-Wāqi has become necessary because of the new realities in which we live, of the disruption, of a rupture of modernity, and of the new realities of the modern world and the condition of the modern man. And then in this kind of confusing realities and this kind of major seismic shifts that has happened in the modern world, they bring an Islamic discourse that is informed by reality, and to bring clarity to how Muslims should build their Islamic discourse and what shape and nature should Sharia or Shariatic discourse have in the modern world. And if that responds to the shifts of realities in the modern world and to the modern condition is one of the main justifications for Fiqh al-Wāqi, that requires, in my view, a little bit more of work and hard work in actually articulating the theory of truth, a theory of reality. and especially in comparison with different Western or secular views, philosophical views or theological views of talking about reality. However, scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi, as I said, is pretty much have had this kind of approach towards reality, as I explained. And then in the attempt to provide kind of legitimacy to the notion of Fiqh al-Wāqi, they have tried to construct a genealogy of the notion by drawing from certain aspect of Islamic pre-modern tradition to prove that Fiqh al-Wāqi has always been a central part of Sharia, a central part of Islamic discourse. And contemporary scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi agree that in its scientific understanding, Fiqh al-Wāqi as al-mustalaha, the notion is a modern concept. However, they argue that its basic features are rooted in the foundational text of Islam and Islamic tradition, and especially in Islamic legal methodology. In order to provide legitimation to Fiqh al-Wāqi, modern Muslim scholars invoke all the Quranic verses or hadiths or tradition from the pious ancestors, from Salafs, that seems to take into consideration or highlight the importance of contextual reality for the establishment of legal rulings. Some of them, like Yusuf Qardawi, rahimullah, have pointed towards Imam Ahmad's stipulation of the knowledge of people, ma'rifatun nas, as one of the 5 qualities that the Mufti should fulfill in order to be fit for giving legal opinions. Others have pointed towards Khatib al-Baghdadi's stipulation that the jurists need to know everything pertaining to this world and the next. In Baghdadi's view, the Muslim jurists need to know the serious and the trivial, the disagreement and the opposite, the beneficial and the harmful, the current affairs of the people and the customs known from them. Baghdadi continues by pointing out that it is a condition of a mufti to combine the erudition required from the books with the above-mentioned knowledge that the jurist can obtain only by mixing with people and studying the culture in which they live. Some other scholars like Abdul Fattah al-Dakhmisi have conceived al-Ghazali's articulation of fiqh al-nafs, the jurisprudence of the self, as a precursor of fiqh al-Wāqi. Al-Ghazali includes it in the list of the conditions for being a mujtahid and conceived fiqh al-nafs as a natural disposition, a ghariza, not connected with the acquired knowledge that is necessary for the acquisition of knowledge of God's rulings. Some other scholars have pointed towards al-Mawardi's consideration of fatna wa dhaka, perspicacity and acuteness of mind, as a necessary condition for ijtihad. For the scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi, all the above-mentioned characteristics that the mujtahid should possess to master the craft of fatwa allude to the necessity of the understanding of reality, Fiqh al-Wāqi, in which the text will be applied. These and other similar texts are presented as precursors of the modern formulation of Fiqh al-Wāqi. However, Fiqh al-Wāqi scholars almost unanimously, in agreement, trace back the origin of the notion of Fiqh al-Wāqi to the writings of Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, who in his book, I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in, he states that the mufti or a judge will not be able to give a proper fatwa or a legal ruling if not 2 kinds of understanding are not realized beforehand. The first type, he says, is the understanding of reality, fahm al-waqi', and its comprehension, tafaqquh, as well as the deduction of true knowledge about what has occurred through contextual indications, qara'in, hints, amarat, and signs, alamat, until reality is thoroughly comprehended. So for Ibn Qayyim, first of all, a judge needs to understand reality and acquire a true understanding of what has happened by analyzing the indications, hints, signs, etc. And then he says, the second type of understanding that is necessary for a proper fatwa, and it comes after the first one, is the understanding of what is obligatory for a particular reality. Fahm al-wajib fil waqi'. So once you have an understand what is the reality, you have to understand then what is al-wajib fi hadha, what is obligatory for this reality, what is the ruling of God for this particular reality, which means what is the ruling of God through which he Ibn Qayyim says, through which he adjudicated in his book and through the tongue of his prophet concerning this reality. Afterwards, it says the mufti or the judge applied the ruling to the other, to the reality. And then he says, the scholar is he who reaches from the knowledge of reality and its comprehension to the knowledge of the ruling of God and his prophet. And here, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya expressed in a nutshell the main element of fiqh al-tanzil, applicative ijtihad, or applied ijtihad. The need to understand reality, fahm al-waqi', is portrayed as important as the need to understand the textual ruling relevant to the reality in question. Only after the textual and the contextual kind of knowledge are fulfilled, the first can be applied to the second, and the sound fatwa can be issued. Thus, knowledge of people's states and living conditions is an essential element of ijtihad and sound juridical thinking. By equating fiqh al-waqi' with Ibn Qayyim's fahm al-waqi', contemporary scholars or proponents of fiqh al-waqi' try to ground the notion in the tradition, to equip it with an honorable legal pedigree, and to justify its articulation as an important vehicle of legal change. And pretty much these have been some of the ways in which scholars of fiqh al-waqi' have tried to construct the genealogy of fiqh al-waqi' by going in the tradition and extracting from it all the scriptural texts, Quran and Sunnah, or sayings or actions from the Salafs, or elements within the Islamic discourse, Islamic law discourse, and they have that take care or is important for reality and highlights the importance of reality in giving fatwa, and they have all gathered them together and transformed them in a kind of solid justification for fiqh al-waqi' as they present it in today's time. Then, after this, they provide a definition and understanding of what fiqh al-waqi' is. And as I said, fiqh al-waqi' has been used in contemporary Islamic thought from many trends of Islamic thought, and from many scholars, and is conceivable that they will have different approaches of what fiqh al-waqi' is for them. And although proponents of fiqh al-waqi' agree in conceiving fiqh al-waqi' as important juridical tool for renewal and reform, nevertheless, their articulation and definition of it have been many, and in many respects, different from each other. Some scholars have approached fiqh al-waqi' mainly from a theological perspective, others from a political one, and some of them have articulated fiqh al-waqi' from the angle of Islamic movement and da'wah, and others from that of Islamic legal methodology, Usul al-Fiqh. Thus, the main approaches towards fiqh al-waqi' can be described or summarized as the theological, the reformist, the political, and the legal. So, Kalami approach, Haraki Da'wi, Siyasi, and Usuli. And I will go through some of representative of each of this, let's say, approaches towards fiqh al-waqi'. In his book on the topic of fiqh al-waqi', al-Bihi defines fiqh al-waqi' as the knowledge of the ways in which the existing thing is in itself, in its circumstances, and of the ways to achieve it, to achieve this kind of knowledge, and the knowledge of the conditions of the recipient. Here, and this is a theological approach to fiqh al-waqi' consists in the ability of human beings to acquire sound knowledge of the extramental and external reality, of the ways that render it possible, and of the conditions that the person should fulfill in order to be able to obtain it. In this book, the author's attention towards the theological and epistemological aspects of fiqh al-waqi' sets his work apart from the other primary works on the topic. However, like many other scholars of fiqh al-waqi', the author's ultimate concern remains the juridical and the practical aspects of fiqh al-waqi'. Hence, despite the theological emphasis, his book is mainly focused on those aspects of reality that are the object of Sharia's rulings. And the second approach towards fiqh al-waqi' as a istilah, as a compound term, is the political one. And a politically oriented understanding of fiqh al-waqi' was articulated in the early 1990s within the Saudi Salafi circles, Sahwi Salafi circles. It was invoked by we don't have time, unfortunately, to delve in it here, but it was invoked by the Saudi Sahwa as a central element of their renewal project that aim to re-enchant the political sphere and fight the fragmentation of social life in Saudi Arabia and in the Muslim world in general. Fiqh al-Wāqi became a topic of intense debates within the Saudi Salafi circles, and one of the main exponents of the Saudi Sahwa, Nasir Umar, who was born in 1952, defines it as that Fiqh al-Wāqi is a science or knowledge, a discipline, making it possible to understand current situations, notably the factors acting on societies, the forces dominating states, the ideas designed to undermine faith, and the legitimate means of protecting the Ummah and making it advance now and in the future. This is the definition that he gives. This definition and others similar to it present Fiqh al-Wāqi mainly in political and geostrategic terms as an Islamic knowledge that permits the sound diagnosis of the reality surrounding the Muslim Ummah, enabling Muslims to be aware of the threats that different foreign ideologies pose to their faith. It also allows them to discover the conspiracies of the enemies against Islam, take measures against foreign ideologies, and preserve the correct understanding or application of Islamic faith in Muslim life. This definition it was very appropriate with the Sahwi engagement in a political and social struggle to restore the relevance of Sharia in the Saudi kingdom, to fight the fragmentation of social life caused by modernization process, and eliminate Saudi's modernist ideological influence on society. And a third approach to Fiqh al-Wāqi that we can discern is the Haraki Da'wi approach, like the Islamic activist, revivalist, preaching approach. And the notion of Fiqh al-Wāqi, apart from Sahwa, as we say, Salafi Sahwa and other scholars more theologically oriented, has been an essential part also of the Muslim Brotherhood or Islamic revivalism more generally. The participants in Islamic awakening, Sahwa Islamiyah, have played a crucial role in articulating the idea of Fiqh al-Wāqi and in propagating its importance for the contemporary Islamic discourse. According to Yusuf Qaradawi, Fiqh al-Wāqi is based on a careful study of the living reality that comprehends all the aspects of the topic, which relies on the soundest data and the most accurate statistics. On similar lines, in another work, he describes Fiqh al-Wāqi as based on a scientific and objective study of the nature of phenomenon, a study that reveals all its dimensions and elements, clarifies their advantages and disadvantages, and highlight the relevant influencing factors. So as you can see, in the revivalist discourse, the discourse of the Sahwa Islamiyah, Fiqh al-Wāqi is equated with a comprehensive understanding of the human living reality in all its aspects and manifestations. The ever-changing social contingent realities, the dynamics of human life, the continuous emergence of new occurrences or the flow of human history are what constitutes reality. Reality is everything that happens around us. It is the understanding of this fluctuating, ever-changing, and dynamic human reality, as well as the attempt to provide a Shariatic grounding for it, ta'sil al-Shari, that constitutes the main focus of the revivalist discourse on Fiqh al-Wāqi. And lastly, the above-mentioned approaches and definitions of Fiqh al-Wāqi has been often criticized by the critics of Fiqh al-Wāqi as lacking the necessary scientific rigor of Islamic legal methodology. And consequently, they have been criticized for being vague, subjective, unregulated, and not scientific in terms of definition and understanding. And as a response to that, many Usul fiqh scholars or scholars, fuqaha, have tried to conceive Fiqh al-Wāqi within the Usul fiqh framework and delineate a clear determinants, dawabit, for its utilization. Generally, they have envisioned Fiqh al-Wāqi as a crucial element of, or equivalent to what is known as Fiqh al-Tanzil or Fiqh al-Nawazil, so applicative jurisprudence or jurisprudence that is applied in reality, etc. So scholars, for example, like Bin Bayya, relying mostly on Shatibi, have identified Fiqh al-Wāqi with the Usul fiqh framework of ijtihad through tahqiq al-manat. Tahqiq al-manat is the verification of the hinge, the verification of the illah, of the ratio legis, in the particular reality. So he has identified Fiqh al-Wāqi, relying on Shatibi, as I said that Fiqh al-Wāqi is nothing else than an ijtihad through tahqiq al-manad, whether it is in general or particular form. In its general form, tahqiq al-manad consists of the application of the established legal rulings, hukm, to the new occurrences and events in a general and universal sense. Whereas in its particular form, tahqiq al-manad consists in the investigation by the jurist of each legally responsible person, mukallaf, with respect to the indication of accountability, what's called dalail taklifiyya, incumbent on him, from where the jurist determines in what ways and to what degree the general legal obligation should be applied to the person in question. In this process, the jurist might restrict what is unrestricted or add more restriction to the person in question in order to protect it from some of the problems that might happen if the hukum is applied without taking into consideration its circumstances. Understanding of the reality, so Fiqh al-Wāqi, of the subject of the law, both in its individual and social aspect, is crucial for the sound verification of the hinge, of the ratio legis, for the sound tahqiq al-manad. And hence, for many legal scholars, Fiqh al-Wāqi constitutes the essence of tahqiq al-manad. And Bin Baya has been one of them who has pushed this more than the others. Bin Baya added to tahqiq al-manad also the need for taking into consideration the jurisprudence of the outcomes, fiqh al-ma'alat. In the application of tahqiq al-manad, as part of the assessment of the reality, and while giving the ruling on a specific situation, the jurist needs to evaluate the outcomes or the consequences of the actions of the legally responsible person that will follow as a result of the ruling. Therefore, for Bin Baya, tahqiq al-manad through fiqh al-Wāqi wa tawaqwa. So tahqiq al-manad through jurisprudence of reality and that of the outcomes is tantamount, as he said, to renewal and modernization, tajdid wa tahdith, of Islamic jurisprudence. Or, he says, an actualization of it, tahyin of it. So, the identification of Fiqh al-Wāqi with a particular legal instrument, like tahqiq al-manad or fiqh al-ma'alat, is an attempt by the Usul fiqh scholars to provide a legitimation to Fiqh al-Wāqi and strengthen its legitimacy. The Usul fiqh framework invests Fiqh al-Wāqi with an aura of objectivity and scientific rigor. However, in themselves, these legal instruments do not provide a jurist with a theory of truth. They don't say anything about the ontological nature of the external reality and its relation with the human epistemological faculties. They merely indicate the need for taking into consideration reality before the application of the rule of a hukum. Apart from the elaboration of some commonsensical and general dawabit that the scholar should follow in order to avoid the miscomprehending reality, the Usul fiqh writings on the topic do not contain any elaborated hermeneutical apparatus that lays out the methodological steps that will guarantee the sound verification or the discernment of the true nature of the reality under investigation. And these were some of the different approaches that Muslim scholars have had. Unfortunately, we don't have time in this talk to go through all the debates between them and the critics of Fiqh al-Wāqi. But I wanted just to highlight for you some of the angles in which Muslim scholars have approached the topic. Now, we said at the beginning that Fiqh al-Wāqi is a project of reform and renewal, and projects of reform and renewal have been many. So what is the nature of renewal, tajdeed, and reform of Fiqh al-Wāqi? So what kind of renewal it says? Again, here, we are generalizing because there are different approaches. For example, the Salafi Sahwi approach to Fiqh al-Wāqi in terms of nature of reform is quite, or let's say, substantially different from that of, Bin Baya, Qardawi, and other scholars. But in overall, the proponents of Fiqh al-Wāqi, for proponents of Fiqh al-Wāqi, the ruptures of modernity and the modern condition in which Muslims find themselves are the main reason behind the inability, and first of all, behind the inability of the inherited legal tradition to respond adequately to the new living conditions. For them, the modern reality constitutes the background and the rationale behind the perceived need for the establishment of Fiqh al-Wāqi. So Muslim scholars have appropriated at the same time two stances. First of all, is that modernity constitutes a rupture, and the modern reality and the human condition in which we find ourselves is novel, is new, and is different from what Muslim scholars knew beforehand, before modernity. And as we'll see very soon, they consider some of the main elements of this new reality unavoidable. Therefore, they call for their accommodation in Islamic discourse. And the second approach that they have is that is the stance of decline, that for some reason, any one of them gives different reasons or give various reasons, Muslim scholars have lost the pace with the reality. So reality has surpassed them and have surpassed the legal discourse. Therefore, the rupture of modernity accelerated reality and changed significantly the modern condition in which Muslims find themselves. And this is the first stance that they have appropriated. And the second is the discourse of decline, in the sense that Islamic discourse have been left behind. And Muslim scholars have not kept the pace with these changes and have not been providing adequate responses to the needs. Therefore, we need Fiqh al-Wāqi. Therefore, scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi conceive themselves as bearers of this challenge, providing an Islamic discourse in which reality and fiqh or sharia and what are combined together and are taken into consideration. So for them, the inherited legal tradition needs a substantial reform. For example, Qardawi, in an article on Fiqh al-Wāqi wa Fiqh al-Taghayyur in mid-90s, says Fiqh al-Wāqi is an absolute necessity, especially in our age in which the reality, al-Wāqi'ah, has greatly changed from the previous times. It is no longer sufficient for a jurist to limit himself to reading books of jurisprudence, despite the abundant knowledge in them. It is obligatory for him to read the book of reality with jurist insight and perspicacious jurisprudence until he is able to apply Sharia legal norms in a correct way by putting things in perspective and approaching them to the correct angle. And Bin Baya in the mid-2000, or I think, no, in the 2013 or 14, in one of his books, The Path to Peace, which is a collection of his essay, says, among others, the classical legal extrapolations, he says, were correct in their times. And some continue to be correct even today. The new and modern extrapolation that are based on a sound foundation as regards to the ascertaining the ratio legis, al-manat or la are also correct. To a certain extent, he says, they resemble the relation, so the relation between the old fiqh or pre-modern fiqh with the modern one. To a certain extent, they resemble the relationship between classical mathematics, which provided plausible solution with the epistemic and realist paradigm of their time, and modern mathematics, which provides solutions that are plausible and relevant for the age in which we live. So here, somehow, Bin Baya is presenting the new contemporary discourse and himself also as part of kind of Copernican revolution in Islamic law, in which, based on consideration of reality, a new discourse, a new ahkam have been established, a new paradigm has been established to make the Islamic discourse relevant for the modern world. So overall, scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi acknowledge that secular modernity, as I said, has brought in some significant changes in the texture of reality and in the way the modern man conceives his place in the world and society. For them, any meaningful Islamic reform should take into consideration the new realities and accommodate them into the Islamic discourse through the establishment of a new relationship between text and context, between Nas and al-Wāqi. The emphasized role given to reality in the new jurisprudences and the pragmatic and utilitarian elements in the new proposals of proponents of Fiqh al-Wāqi, of new proposal for the dialectic between text and context, is conceived by them as the most suitable way to make space of what is perceived as unavoidable stringencies of modern reality in the Islamic discourse. For example, Bin Baya, as I said, like many other, like almost all scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi, acknowledge that the ruptures of modernity had brought into existence new realities, and that these realities are inescapable. And therefore, the Islamic discourse should be an accommodating discourse, working with reality and not working against reality, as it says. And what are those main frameworks of the modern reality or modern world that are unavoidable and inescapable? For Ibn Baya, they call them the dictates of modern reality. They encompass the nation state, the full acceptance of a nation state, citizenship, the full acceptance of individualism, religious pluralism, tolerance, freedom, human rights, international treaties, multiculturalism, and multi-ethnicity. And other scholars mention also other elements, pretty much like democratic movements, democratic aspect, human individualism and the ability to choose for himself, etc. So in his view, in the view of Ibn Baya, Fiqh al-Wāqi is a framework that could be invoked to make space of these modern notions in the contemporary Islamic discourse, because he, as I said, considers them unavoidable and inescapable. And he sees much of the decline of Islamic thought as a stubborn attempt to resist modern realities, right? And pretty much Qaradawi is in the same way to a certain degree. The Saudi Sahwis were fairly different in this aspect, but we don't have time to delve on this now. Then, so this is the premise in which they start their theory of why do you need renewal and why do you need reform? Because this has happened, because reality has surpassed our scholars or has surpassed our fiqh, and we need to do a new one and to accommodate this new reality to the greatest degree possible, etc. And that gives a form and shape to the nature of the renewal that they are proposing. Now, the contemporary Islamic discourse, I am closing with this, inshallah. The contemporary Islamic scene has witnessed a proliferation of various kinds of new jurisprudences that are articulated and proposed as instruments of legal renewal. You will have fiqh al-tanzil, fiqh al-maqasid, fiqh al-awlawiyat, etc., right? And fiqh al-Wāqi is only one of them and has been imagined by various scholars in different relations with these other jurisprudences. Now, the contemporary proliferation of these new jurisprudences, that is part of the Islamic contemporary thought, that we have the proliferation of new jurisprudences, is part of what Arya Nakisa calls secondary segmentation, which refers to the modern phenomenon of the creation of new legal subfields like fiqh al-maqasid, fiqh al-awliyat, fiqh al-tanzil, fiqh al-waqi, for the purpose of justifying and regimenting the use of utilitarian modes of juristic reasoning. The aim behind the emergence of this new legal subfield through the process of secondary segmentation is that of allowing for renewal and reform of the classical legal doctrine. How do you renew and reform the classical legal doctrine? Is by subdivision, readjustment, reorganization, expansion, or restriction of the classic Islamic legal framework and structure. Through this reshuffling, if we can say so, of the existing legal hierarchies and scope of various mechanisms, proponents of Fiqh al-Wāqi try to bring reform and renewal without formally severing the link with the established legal tradition. So they take the tradition and they reorganize the legal hierarchies by giving more power to certain aspects and by marginalizing certain aspects that before might have been more important. And by this reshuffling of the legal hierarchies and the relation between them, they try to bring reform and renewal. And the result of this process of reorganizing the legal hierarchy is the ascription of new roles and powers to previously marginal or non-central aspect of Islamic law. In the new legal subfields, like Fiqh al-Wāqi, the contextual and utilitarian considerations are endowed with an unprecedented role and power to limit, suspend, or circumvent in their name the import of textual rulings. The inferential aspect of Islamic law, so-called istidlali, like urf, customs, istihsan, juristic preference, maslaha, maqasid, and al-waqi' consideration, assume in this reorganization a central role in the newly established legal hierarchies, articulated by proponent of Fiqh al-Wāqi. And the main motive behind the creation of new legal subfields is the establishment of the new ways of conceiving the relationship between text and context, between nas and waqia. And proponents of Fiqh al-Wāqi has portrayed this as the only way to respond to the new realities created by the modern condition and the perceived ossification of the traditional Islamic law due to its presupposed textual, linguistic, and overly literalist framework. So through this kind of approach, by infusing the classical Islamic legal hierarchies and structure with utilitarian and pragmatic elements like maslaha, maqasid, al-waqi', etc., and by reorganizing the legal hierarchies and the relation between different mechanisms of Islamic law, Muslim proponents of Fiqh al-Wāqi has tried to bring new structure of Islamic law, new fatwas, and new discourse. And all of this with the aim of keeping pace with the new reality, accommodating it as much as possible in the Islamic discourse, and providing a framework in which the modern condition can be according to them, adequately understood, and the Sharia can be properly applied according to the text, according to the conditions of the Muslims, or according to the condition in which Muslims find themselves today. So that was pretty much what I had prepared for today. Jazakallahu khairan. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika wa tabarak asmaka wa ta'ala jaduka la ilaha ghayruka. Now I'm open to any question you might have and anything else. Shukran.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rezart, for the very informative lecture. So we have one question in the chat. While we discuss that, we invite all our participants to post their questions below the one we have, inshallah. And let me read the question so that everybody can hear it, inshallah. It's two parts. Maybe we can go over them one by one, however you prefer, Doctor.
Okay.
What are some good introductory resources, books, articles, or lectures for learning more about Fiqh al-Wāqi'? Additionally, are there any contemporary works that address how Fiqh al-Wāqi' can help navigate the modern activist space?
Mm-hmm. Let me write it down so I can also see it.
Yeah, it's in the chat as well.
Okay. So the first one, what are some good introductory resources, book of lectures? From the proponent, from the main actors involved in Fiqh al-Wāqi', I don't know which language is the person who is talking about. If we are talking about English, let's presuppose English. A book on Fiqh al-Wāqi' per se, as far as I know, is not yet, does not exist, that is detailed and thorough on the topic. I myself, this is the reason why I did also my thesis, and this is why I'm working on it as a book, right? To publish it, inshallah, soon as a book, titled provisionally as a kind of jurisprudence of reality in contemporary Islamic thought, in which I will try to provide a genealogy of the idea, starting from the 1950s, a little bit before, but especially from 1950s until today. And when it comes to the proponents of Fiqh al-Wāqi' per se, two of them that are the main, Yusuf Qaradawi and Abdullah bin Baya, some of their works have been translated in English. And Bin Baya has a book called Path to Peace, which is a collection of his essays, and there normally he speaks extensively on Fiqh al-Wāqi'. He has a book also on, I think it's called Juristic Reasoning, if I remember correct, juristic reasoning, ascertaining juristic reasoning in Islam or something like that, in which he talks about Tahqiq al-Mannat as the main framework of Fiqh al-Wāqi'. Al-Qaradawi then has in English many books on the so-called Sahwa Islamiyya, like the jurisprudence of priorities and the Islamic resurgence between extremism and Sahwa Islamiyya bain al-Tatarruf. I forgot now how it's translated in English, but from the proponents of Fiqh al-Wāqi', the books of Qaradawi and the books of Bin Baya exist in English. And that can be accessed. I think they are also online. Whereas in Arabic, there are a few scholars who have written on Fiqh al-Wāqi'. Sometimes focused on one scholar like Qaradawi, sometimes on Bimbeya, sometimes on like a more general one. And I can provide, I cannot mention them now because there are many. I can provide a kind of a list for the Arab speaking, for whoever is interested to read them in Arabic. And then maybe through the mail list or something, you can substitute to them. Then the second part, the question was Fiqh al-Wāqi, and if you can repeat it for me, let me see it here. It was about how does Fiqh al-Wāqi provides.
Yeah, additionally, are there any contemporary works that address how Fiqh al-Wāqi' can help navigate the modern activist space?
Right. So to be honest, I have not encountered a book or a study focused precisely on this, how Fiqh al-Wāqi' can help navigate the activist space. Normally, books written for Muslim activists, for Muslim da'i, preachers, scholars to Islam, or activists in general, they all emphasize the importance of reality and how the Muslim activist should be aware about the social circumstances in which he and others find themselves, and how the absence of not understanding reality might bring to harmful conclusions, etc. And there is a general discourse there, but as far as I've seen, there is no kind of study or text who takes the reality and their importance for the Muslim activists and analyzes it in depth and provides a kind of very detailed articulation of or a framework that every activist can refer to as a guideline. So I have not seen that neither in Arabic nor in English, but normally my knowledge is not encompassing. So maybe it might exist, but I haven't not encountered such a.
Thank you, Dr. Rezart. And another question we have from Sabir: what are some specific examples of new realities where Fiqh al-Wāqi' would need to be applied? Does this only apply to overarching issues like nation states and international human rights, or does it go down to matters of personal interaction, for example?
Well, normally, mostly, scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi' are interested in providing, let's say, framework or responses to the big problems, right? So, for example, Bimbeya, on which I have written I have published an article this year on his Fiqh al-Wāqi' and the application of it in some aspects, is, for example, the nation state and the Khalifah, and he argues how Fiqh al-Wāqi' consideration will make nation state obligatory, or make nation state be considered a legitimate Islamic framework, and then how the constitutional nationalism should be the framework of the Muslim state, in which not religion, not language, not ethnicity, but a core of common concepts or precepts written in the constitution will be the framework of allegiance and bay'ah and all the thing, right? And then he goes to interfaith dialogue, and he speaks about how Fiqh al-Wāqi' should, the old idea of dhimmi, protected minorities, or jizya, or all these things are not anymore applicable to modern realities, and the fiqh should be changed, and he gives its own idea, and how he centers the Constitution of Medina as a kind of modern framework for modern state, etc. So mainly they are concerned on the big topics that are the stumbling blocks, according to them, with regards to contemporary Islamic thought that is relevant for modern time. But sometimes also it can go even the personal level, especially, for example, both for Qaradawi and for Bimbeya, the notion of takfir, the Muslim extremism, of individuals, and this the idea of making takfir to others, and having a religious discourse that is exclusive and is not encompassing of all Islamic trends, or the discourse of how to behave with the non-Muslims, al-wala wal-bara, and how this al-bara has been misunderstood as hate towards the non-Muslims, and they on the basis of Fiqh al-Wāqi', they try to bring some, let's say, new fatwas, some legal positions in which takfir against Muslim is discouraged or almost make impossible. And the relation with the other non-Muslim is based on not only peace, but also cooperation and even love sometimes, right? And this is on the interpersonal relation. So there is an aspect of Fiqh al-Wāqi in which scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi try to bring fatwas or opinions that, according to them, will improve the interpersonal relation of Muslim with others, with themselves, within themselves and then with the others. But most of the time, their main energy is spent on these big frameworks, as I mentioned, human rights and citizenship and nation state and interfaith dialogue and constitutional citizenship, etc. But also there is an aspect of it that trickles down to individuals and the way they behave, socially with others.
Thank you, Doctor. We have another question from Abdul Rahman. How does Fiqh al-Wāqi differ from traditional fiqh? And what led scholars to introduce this term? Isn't all fiqh, by definition, a form of Fiqh al-Wāqi, since fiqh inherently deals with individuals' interactions with reality, al-Wāqi?
Yeah, Yossi is very right. It's a very good question, actually. And there is a very interesting thing, because when I spoke about constructing the genealogy of Fiqh al-Wāqi, I mentioned how scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi have relied on all the Islamic legal tradition elements of al-Wāqi, right? And they have used them as a legitimation for their own project of Fiqh al-Wāqi. And in a sense, their construction of the genealogy is it's conservative, let's say like this. It's something that they have two movements. First of all, they explicitly say that Fiqh al-Wāqi is not a new, we are coining a new concept, but it's not new. It's always existed from the scriptural sources, but from the time of early Muslims to I don't know, to a particular time, let's say like this, right? Because usually most of them have this discourse of decline, which depends on where they put the finger, right? They say that, I don't know, 18th century, 12th century, 13th century, there was a decline. So let's say from the early Muslims to later generations, Fiqh al-Wāqi was already existing. Therefore, they are in their books and their discourse, they say we are not bringing anything new. This is what we already knew. Islamic fiqh takes into consideration al-Wāqi. Then at the same time, they do a second move. And the second move is that Muslim scholars or Islamic contemporary discourse have failed to take the Wāqi into consideration. And the inherited legal tradition was responding to al-Wāqi, which is different from ours, first of all. And second, contemporary scholars, most of the time, do not have a firm grasp of modern realities. Therefore, their fatwas are problematic. Hence, I'm restoring what has been missed, because they already claim that they are not bringing anything new. But on the name of this restoration, then here it is when the new, let's say, element comes, right? That are not present in the classical Islamic discourse. In the name of this restoration of what a reality was and how it should have been always used by Muslims before they declined, they bring all the fatwas that they want, or let's say all the legal positions that they think is crucial, which some of them are kind of selecting some marginal opinions that existed before in Islamic tradition, making them central, or coming up with new legal positions on the basis of bypassing the tradition, going back to the sources and coming up with the new positions, or sometimes even contradicting or the tradition. For example, if you see when Abdullah bin Bayah has a discourse on the Constitution of Medina, right, in which he tries to provide the Constitution of Medina to analyze the Constitution of Medina that the Prophet, this contract that the Prophet did with the non-Muslims in the Medina society when he migrated. He tries to understand this as constitutional citizenship according to Habermas. He said it's the same thing, a set of principles, multicultural society. It was not religion that gathers people together, it's a set of principles, the Constitution of Medina. Today we have the constitutional nation state. Anyways, then he said this is the original plan and the will of Allah regarding the way Muslims should constitute their societies. But then, because of the betrayal of the non-Muslim during the time of the Prophet, because of their declaring war and the war that happens, then an exceptional reality came into existence, that Muslims were in war with other non-Muslims, right, during the time of Prophet and later on in the Futuhat. And therefore, because of that, some rules of the Ahlul Dhimma, the rules of jizya, the tax, the rules of interaction with non-Muslims, right? All these classical rules of fiqh that you find in the chapters of fiqh dedicated to the topic, they came to life later in the life of the Prophet as a response, he says, to particular circumstances, military circumstances in the time of the Prophet, when he was attacked by idol worshippers or by Jews or etc., Christian, etc. Then he said, and for the majority of the Muslim history, this situation was such. Empires fighting on basis of religion, etc. Therefore, these rules that were supposed to be temporary became permanent. But today, he says, in the new modern world, in the world of constitutions, of international organizations like UN, etc., there is no anymore need for this. We need to return to the original, to original view, framework that Allah wanted people to live, which is the Constitution of Medina, which is conceived as an equality of citizenship, a society, multi-religious society based on one constitution, not religion and not, right, the allegiance, etc. So he gives that. And this kind, therefore, for him, the entire ahkam of dhimma, jizya, relation with the non-Muslim are abrogated, are not anymore in, functional or in existence, should not be anymore be those, because they are, according to his reconstruction, that was supposed to be a particular ahkam related to particular circumstances that the Prophet encountered during his late life. But in the modern, but the real Islam, I mean, the original Islam wanted Constitution of Medina as it was at the beginning of the Prophet's migration to Medina. In this context, for example, based on Fiqh al-Wāqi, based on the restoring the reality consideration of the Islamic tradition, Ibn Baya comes, let's say, with a framework that might, if that goes against, or let's say might not be accepted by the majority of traditional scholars or traditional Islamic law. And so it is true that Muslims call Fiqh al-Wāqi, sorry for responding to the length, but this is important. It is true, in my view, that from a theoretical perspective, scholars of Fiqh al-Wāqi do not bring anything like extraordinary, in the, as I said, in fiqh or in al-Wāqi. And Islamic tradition had always had those elements, and they accept that. But in the name of restoring that, because they think that it's been lost, contemporary Islamic thought, they bring novel positions, novel legal frameworks, and novel ways of building Islamic life. I mentioned the Ahlul Dhimma, jizya, and other aspects, just because in these points you can see the difference between them. So it is at the same time true that there is nothing new, and at the same time true that when it comes to the concrete positions, you see divergences with, let's say, pre-modern Islamic classical tradition. Wallahu a'lam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rezart. You said it's a long answer, but it was very enlightening. Thank you. And Jawhara shared the name of one of the books, I think, The Exercise of Islamic Juristic Reasoning by Ascertaining the Ratio Legis.
Yes, this was the book I was trying to reconstruct. Thank you, Jawhara.
Yeah, and Asif has asked, are there significant scholarly works by critics of Fiqh al-Wāqi?
So in my thesis, and hopefully in my book, I have also a chapter on the critics of Fiqh al-Wāqi. And the short answer is that there is no a deep and thorough critique of books of Fiqh al-Wāqi. There are critiques of Fiqh al-Wāqi done by scholars, but it's mainly of, They have not sat and dealt with the theory it from the A to Z and try to, to criticize it in fullness. And that does not happen. You see some critique here and there within the chapter of a scholar or in a debate that he might have had with someone. For example, when it comes to Qardawi, many, let's say, modernist scholars, or even, let's say, a more Salafi-oriented scholars, have criticized individual fatwas, right? I don't know, Qardawi's fatwa on democracy, Qardawi's fatwa on the relation with the non-Muslims, Qardawi's fatwas on the inheriting from non-Muslim parents, Qardawi's fatwas and his committee in the Council of Research and Fatwa in Europe of buying houses with riba for necessities, etc. So you see that there are responses to different usages of al-waqi' by scholars. So other scholars have replied to the fatwa, trying to say that this fatwa is not sound Islamically. They have also criticized the way this scholar have used al-waqi' as a justification for giving a particular fatwa. But you don't see voluminous works or like very academic works on fiqh al-waqi' per se in itself and as a critique. You find books on fiqh al-waqi', they are mainly sympathetic to it. What I have seen is that when it comes to the Salafi Sahwa, and Salafi Sahwa is a little bit different, or to a certain degree even significantly different from what I mentioned. I have seen that the most of the critique of fiqh al-waqi', as it has been articulated by the Salafi Sahwa, comes from Saudi Arabia and comes from the people who have replied to Nasir Umar, Salman al-Auda, of the pre-90s, from the 80s onwards until 1995 or something like that. Because then we were imprisoned, and then after release, they changed. Some of them changed direction, etc. So it's more complicated. I have seen that scholars of fiqh al-waqi', Salafi scholars have replied to fiqh al-waqi' as it was articulated by the Sahwi Sahwa, more in depth and more with seriousness. So they have taken it more seriously than other scholars, I would say. Yeah, and there are books, there are fatwas, individual fatwas by the main scholars of Salafi Dawah, Uthaymin, Bin Baz, Fawzan, and all the scholars. But there are also books dedicated by a little bit minor scholars, but dedicated to fiqh al-waqi' in itself. And Nasir Umar has a famous book on fiqh al-waqi', and there is a text published for the moment, his name is escaping, that he takes the book of Nasir Umar and replies to it word by word, the kind of traditional style that you take the text line by line and reply to it. And I have seen that, and I'll say that the internal debate within the Salafi circles in Saudi Arabia, especially, between the Salafi Sahwas and the other groups that follow Nasr al-Albani, the main sheikhs of Salafi Da'wah, Bin Baz, Uthaymin, Fawzan, Jibreen, etc. The debate within the Salafi circles on fiqh al-waqi' has been much more intense and to a degree more serious than the debate, let's say, between revivalist scholars or like Muslim Brotherhood scholars like Qardawi and Abdul Majid Najjar and modernists or some other Salafis that may reply to them. And that was one of my findings in the thesis. And this is why I dedicated almost a chapter to the Salafi response to fiqh al-waqi'. But the response is to a certain degree limited because they are replying to a particular version of fiqh al-waqi' articulated by Salafi Sahwis. That doesn't mean that it's not correct, but it means that it's limited because there are different versions of how you articulate, different approaches. Yeah. But yeah, so that's all I'll say. There are few works that deal with fiqh al-waqi', and they are mainly from Salafi circles, replying to Salafi trends like Salafi Sahwis, and a few works, but not a few here and there, some analysis of particular fatwas of other scholars of fiqh al-waqi', especially Qardawi. And in the process of replying to these fatwas, they have highlighted how Qardawi has misunderstood reality or misapplied it, or Qardawi and others, not only him. Wallahu
alam. So Ambreen asked whether there would be opportunities to email you to discuss some things they have in their mind. I guess you have an Usul Academy email.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Would you mind
They can,
sharing it?
yes,
It's
no problem.
yeah.
I don't know now. I don't remember it, but I think
It's probably Rezart.Beka.
usulacademy.com. Yeah.
Yeah, Rezart.Beka@usulacademy.com. That's
Mhm.
our standard format. Maybe we can have one last question. It seems Jawhara asked this question, but it might take a lot of time to answer. Maybe it's discretion is up to you how you wish to respond. Could you comment on the first principles of Sheikh bin Bayyah in theorizing the modern concepts through the lens of Fiqh al-Wāqi'?
Which first principle? تحقيق المناط.
Yes, maybe Jawhara, if you could.
So I don't recall. I mean, I'm not sure to which first principles you're referring.
Yeah.
He has 12 points methodology. But I'm not sure to what exactly Jawhara is referring.
So Asif asked another question. He asked, how do we situate Sheikh Buti's critique of Fiqh al-Aqalliyat in our discussion of Fiqh al-Wāqi'?
Yeah, so Sheikh Buti, rahimullah, was one of the critics of Fiqh al-Wāqi', and especially of Fiqh al-Aqalliyat, the jurisprudence of minorities, because he thought that if we start doing this, Fiqh al-Aqalliyat, jurisprudence of minority, Fiqh al-Awlawiyat, or Fiqh this and that will, how do you call it, fragment the Sharia. And he did not accept the main premise that because Muslims in the West are in a particular reality, they need a particular fiqh tailored to them. And he said that this undermines Sharia, because Sharia doesn't need to be tailored in the sense there is no need to create a fiqh for particular people or a fiqh for particular regions or realities. We have the fiqh. And if any community has particular needs, then we use our fiqh as a fiqh, as a holistic one entity. Therefore, Buti was afraid that this justification or rationale that we need a new fiqh for particular people in particular regions will give free pass to many people to give fatwa that diverge from traditional Islamic law, because he saw that the reason why this claim was being made that we need a new fiqh for the Muslim minorities in the West was to bring, or the reason why this project was done, or this rationale was being claimed or presented, was because they wanted to legitimize or to issue fatwas, as I mentioned, the buying houses and the remaining married for a woman when she becomes Muslim, the husband is not. And these are very famous fatwas. So Buti understood that they, through the lenses of Fiqh al-Aqalliyat, wanted to legitimize these fatwas. And he was not happy with that. Therefore, he counts as one critic of Fiqh al-Wāqi' for a more traditionalist, maybe Sufi-oriented, but let's say traditionalist, in a general way, perspective. So critiques of Fiqh al-Wāqi' has come from a traditionalist camp. It has come from a Salafi camp. It has come also even within the, let's say, Brotherhood or revivalist camp, and normally the modernist camp. And they are scattered here and there, reply to specific person, to specific movements, and it's not easy to put them together. But Buti he didn't talk about Fiqh al-Wāqi' like, Fiqh al-Wāqi' like precisely, but within his discourse, within his critique of Fiqh al-Aqalliyat, he also will provide a critique of Fiqh al-Wāqi'. So Fiqh al-Wāqi', in his view, let's say like this, should not become a sabab to invent new jurisprudences. we have one fiqh. It takes into consideration reality, and everyone can refer to it. So there is no need to kind of make an emergency fiqh with emergency fatwas, with extraordinary situations, whatever, because that he thought will become permanent. Like it has become to a certain degree, right? It starts an extraordinary, as a kind of emergency thing. There is an emergent need, and then the fatwa becomes established, and then becomes tradition, and then it's difficult to change it. So the extraordinary situations become the normal situation. And he saw that, he foresaw that, and he was critical of that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rezart, for your enlightening presentation and lecture. I learned a lot,
you
and
all.
I hope our audiences also benefit. Inshallah, we plan to upload this lecture on YouTube as well for others to benefit. And we are looking forward for your book to be published so that
Inshallah.
we can, inshallah, read in more detail, inshallah. This was a preview of something that seems it will be really good, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair to you and to all the participants, and sorry for the lengthy responses and for taking too much of your times. I hope
Thank you for taking the time to answer in depth. Thank
That's
you
my pleasure.
on behalf of our audience as well.
Jazakallah.
And we will conclude the program here, inshallah. And Dr. Enes, would you like to make the final concluding remarks as the academic coordinator of Usul?
I'm very delighted and grateful to Dr. Rezart for participating tonight's talk. And I also learned a lot. And looking forward to reading more from Dr. Rezart, inshallah, on this subject. Jazakallah khairan. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi
Alaikum salam.
wa barakatuh.